It went blank. Hi, here we are celebrating Nurses Day and Nurses Week. May 6th every year is Nurses Day, and Nurses Week is right around that time too. So I'm hoping that this show will be airing then so all of you can think about your nurses. But we want to talk about our diversified careers today. And as you know, I co-authored this book, Nurses on Our Own, with Joy Smith-Catterson and Patricia Skalka. And it's our experiences in the hospital, in the psych unit, in the emergency room, and in our own business. And many people have said this is a book to read for women, nurses or not, and even men, because we had many, many obstacles. We ended up in court. We sued a hospital. You'll have to read it to find out why. But today, joining me, I have two other nurses that I would like to have talk about their diversified careers. We're looking for a lot of you to go into nursing, as a matter of fact, which is a great career. So first of all, I want to introduce you to Laura Locasio. Laura, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Jackie Blickle. Thank you for joining us. I want to start with you, Laura. What made you go into nursing to start with? Do you have any idea when you thought of it?
I actually do, and it's pretty amazing. I have wanted to be a nurse my whole life, since as long as I can remember. My godmother and cousin was a nurse. She was about 20 years older than I, so there's a story that goes way back. I was sitting on her lap as a young baby, a couple months old, and she put her nurse's cap on me. And someone snapped a shot of that, and I still have that picture somewhere. I have to find that. But I guess just growing up around her, maybe hearing her stories, I just always, I felt that that was my calling in life.
She's the one that you said she and I have something in common because we both were educated in psychiatry at Chicago State Mental Hospital.
Absolutely. When you told me that story, I had remember her telling us stories about Dunning Hospital, is what she called it. And yes, that was way back when things were quite different.
Someone did a magazine article one time, and they put down Karon from psychiatry to on the air or something like that, as if I were a patient. Actually, I worked in psychiatry a lot, and Jackie, so did you.
I did indeed. So. I'm thinking about Laura and what a prophecy that was to wear that cap. And then years later, for me, I was always thinking I wanted to be a journalist. And I stayed overnight during high school with a friend, and she was going to Grant Hospital, and she was going to be a nurse. And I spent the whole night reading the book, and I said, that's what I want to be. And the irony is that I got to be a journalist because many of my jobs required a newsletter or public appearances or things that a journalist would do. So that was kind of fun. But that's how I got my seed that I wanted to be a nurse. And I always wanted to be a surgical nurse.
I decided in 4th grade. I just thought of what the title of that article was, From Psychiatric Care to On the Air.
Oh,
so
cute.
It sounded like I was a patient.
That works.
Anyway, it was interesting because I wanted to be a nurse, I guess, since 4th grade. When the counselor asked me, what do you want to be? I said a nurse. And I think it was because my girlfriend's brother was getting beat up one time when we came upon him, and I had to take care of him because he was injured. And I think from that day forward, I figured I want to be the person that could step in and do something.
Yeah,
so
I always loved taking care of people and would play, nurse as a little girl and with the little doctor's kit and take care of your baby dolls and
and it doesn't go away. We're always caregivers. I'm rapidly thinking about my own life and how I always like to take care of people, but right now I'm a senior and I'm taking care of seniors. I do some work with Wheaton Senior Services for DuPage County, and I've got 2 neighbors in my building that I do whatever they need, the doctor, the visit to the doctor, the grocery store, the cleaning. I do all of that, and here I am a senior myself. So it's kind of interesting how the circle completes itself.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So where did you start your career when you graduated? You went to school, first of all.
I went to school. I became an LPN first, and then I went and worked in the. Back then they were using LPNs, a lot more than we are now. Although we're starting to, kind of come full circle and using them again.
I had LPNs working for my company. I loved having LPNs work for my company.
Yes, absolutely. We were able to do a lot, and that was back in the mid-late 80s. Worked in blood banking, and then did some apheresis. I was an apheresis specialist. We did plasma exchange. That was when the AIDS epidemic was, pretty prevalent everywhere, and we would go and do plasma exchange on AIDS and leukemia patients. And then my mom was ill, and after she died, I took care of her as well. I went back to, I always knew I wanted to be an RN, and went back and got myself through school and worked hard and got my RN. Yeah.
So what was your first job then?
I worked at Loyola. Loyola hired 20 of us new grads out of school, and we got to choose at the time what department we wanted. It was like, wow, you're a kid in a candy store. Do you want ER? Do you want medical intensive care? Do you want surgery? And I, of course, wanted to do it all. It was so hard for me to choose.
Today's nurses don't have that choice.
And they don't.
And they don't have an opportunity that we had.
They don't have the experience.
They don't have the experience.
And she had clinical experience as an LPN, even though you went to a school that was the 2-year program, right? You had already had your clinical experience as an LPN?
I did. I had to go through clinical again as well through COD, but yeah. So it was kind of stressful. What do I pick? What's the right thing to do? Because I wanted to do it all.
So what'd you pick?
I chose medical intensive care, and it was a great choice. It was kind of like fresh out of school. You have all of that knowledge fresh in your mind, and you were still learning a lot. I then had to go through their 6-month intensive care course at Loyola as well. So I just kept learning and learning, and it was never stopped. So it was wonderful. I loved it.
Then where'd you go?
After that, then I went to outpatient care. I went to I wasn't afloat. I think I was in primary care, and I was then having babies and newly married. So the hours were a lot better and easier for me to handle. So I wish I had, and I wish I would have toughed it out in the hospital, because I really was learning a lot. And having a lot of fun doing it. And like Jackie and I had said in the hallway before, it was fun because you were telling interns what to do. Kind of, you were helping them. It was you had so much knowledge that you could actually. It was a great feeling.
And for me, I didn't have a degree, and I still don't. And I got every job I ever went after because of that big E-word experience.
But do you know that as RNs going around the clock 3 years, that was enough for a master's program? Somebody figured out. Could have been a master's degree, but that wasn't the way they worked it. But
for the 3-year diploma programs?
But we had a tremendous amount of clinical experience in addition to theory. And we were lucky at Mount Sinai because we had a medical school there too. Chicago Medical School was there too. So we took classes right with the med students. So we were teaching them things we knew, and they were teaching us things, and we were in competition with them many times. And one time I diagnosed something in clinic that none of them figured out, and it was a pretty simple thing. But the professor made them all write a paper that night because the student nurse knew it and they didn't. And he said to me, and if you go to dinner with any of them and give them the answer, you're going to be thrown out of nursing school. So I had a lot of invitations, but I couldn't take any of them.
They were the best programs. You learned a lot, and that was back to my godmother, what she was in, the 3-year diploma program.
They threw us in clinical situations when we were we had just gotten in the door and we had just gotten our uniforms, and they put a little proby hat on our heads and said, you're going to run the unit. You know, I'll never forget how terrified I was. But I think back now, and I talk to the young, I've mentored a lot of nurses, young nurses, and I think back now how beautiful that was, that I saw surgery, I participated, I was there, and they don't have that luxury.
Well, the other thing about doing that is that you learn techniques like, isolation technique and sterile technique by doing it in surgery and being a scrub nurse and a circulating nurse.
And not reading about it.
Not reading about it or seeing it for one day or something. Then those things carry over to the other things that you do, taking care of patients.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's, hands-on. There's nothing like hands-on. And the clinicals are so important. And
well, when I was a senior, actually, I went to where I had several weeks vacation, and I worked in the emergency room. And the first night, and I had already done my rotation there, which is where you get the education of it for people who don't know what that means. And I walked in, and the supervisor said, "Here's the keys to the emergency room." This was at Mount Sinai. I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "Well, the supervisor was called out of town, and I'm the supervisor of the whole hospital now, so this is your emergency room." And we had gunshots and stabbings all day long there, And I was the only nurse in the emergency room. But, I loved it. And it was on midnights, and it was easy to stay awake because you were busy constantly.
Absolutely.
But ER was my first love anyway.
I remember taking an elective in ER because I wanted contact lenses, and my widowed mother couldn't afford it. And I wanted contact lenses for graduation so that I could walk down the aisle with my roses and not have spectacles on my face. And out of the three of us that did that, I'm still wearing the contact lenses. But that's how I made my money to get my contacts.
Yeah, we were allowed to work on the weekends in neonatal intensive care and places like that too. It was, some of those things were scary when you went in to do them. I mean, you're dealing with babies that are 1 pound and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, the experience, they just don't, it's different these days, how their education. So, yeah, even from when you went to school and I went to school, it was still, the clinical experience was excellent. I really don't know. Now they're doing things, simulators, and of course all computers and on robots. And
the way they train pilots, right?
Yeah, so it's,
I'm
not so sure about that.
The career is a bittersweet experience because you're with people from having babies to passing away. So every part of life is something that you see.
Yeah.
You know, and I said during the snowstorm of '67, they were bringing in women on ironing boards, landing them on helicopters in the park across from Mount Sinai and bringing them in labor for us to deliver the babies. And I said, you know, it's amazing though how you're involved in every part of people's lives.
Yes.
And, you know, in psychiatry, of course, which you also did, you're involved in depth involved in their psychological thing.
But it's such a valuable experience. And I really felt with psychiatry, which was mainly what I did with adolescents and adults, that it gives you an intuition about people, and the science itself teaches you what to ask about, what to look for. It's a real good preparation, no matter what kind of nursing that you do. And I always said, the patient who's in the bed is depressed and has a mental disorder. Because when you have to accept a very critical diagnosis or a very losing a limb, it's all loss. And it's all things that we, as psych nurses, understand.
And see a lot of. And
see a lot of.
How long did you work in psychiatry?
I've been a nurse for 56 years, and I worked 10 years in one hospital as a admission unit, 42-bed hospital, 42 beds. Now they don't make them that big. And I had 10 years at a suburban hospital in an evening situation with dual diagnosis adolescents. And the last job I had, which was the most favorite job of my career, was being a nurse for the Department of Children and Family Services. Never trained. We were never trained on child abuse. But I mean, I learned on the job, and it was a wonderful experience because I used my hospital nursing in tandem with the children, the foster children, the injured children that I came in contact with.
So you went out to homes to see them? Or what?
Sometimes, but mostly it was staffings in the hospital, visiting injured children, going to nursing homes where children are often given up because of their multitudinal incapacitations. The mothers would give them up. That does happen. And so the state, they became wards of the state, and so we had to make sure they were getting adequate nursing and adequate equipment and all of that. It was a very diverse job, and it was, foster parents would call school nurses. I had school nurses calling me saying, you know, last year you helped me with this, and they remember, you know. And the other piece of that was teaching the workers how they can use us, because they didn't know what to do with the nurse. I said, give me that, I'll call the doctor. You know, give me that, I'll find out what was going on.
Well, I was amazed to find out at the end of living at Chicago State Mental Hospital for 3 months, that there were 5,000 patients there. It was really built for 2,000, but there were 5,000. And all of a sudden, I saw some kids roaming around, and I said, do they have a psychiatric problem? They said, no. Like you said, they became wards of the state. And here they were in the middle of all of these psychiatric people. I mean, my one-to-one, as they called it, patient said to me, how do you do? I killed my psychiatrist and threw my cousin in the dryer. And she had, you know, so I mean, they were in the middle of a lot of dangerous type stuff, and so were we, of course.
Absolutely.
Living next door in the dorm to the criminally insane with the searchlights going. I'm surprised you didn't go there for psychiatric.
We went, as an Oak Park nurse, we went to Elgin State Hospital. And I walked in the first day with my peppermint striped glasses, and I was scared to death. And a woman came out of nowhere and had her hands up right in my face, and she says, your glasses are crooked. Oh my goodness, I'm going to get killed right here and now. And it was so funny because I had a wonderful instructor, and she influenced me to take that path to be a psych nurse. And when I was 40 years old, I found her, and she was here in Elmhurst. She was running a nursing home, a dentist's wife she was. And I said, I have to see you, I have to see you. And I went to visit her. I said, I came to say thank you because you really made me who I am. And I've had nurses that I've been able to mentor. And she sat at her desk, and behind her on a shelf was her picture with her cap. And I said, oh, that's you. She said, no, that's my daughter. And it was a flashback, you know. So that was a nice experience.
Did you have a dormitory to live in at Eldon? Or?
We stayed in the nuns, in the convent area, and now, of course, that's all changed, at St. Joe's. And they'd bus us to the hospital. We only ate ice cream and macaroni because the patients made the food.
We had the same experience there. They made the food and they threw the food at you and at each other and made faces at you and hadn't taken a shower in about 5 years. And then they notified me that Friday night we were going to the men's unit to dance with them.
Oh, girls, God bless you.
I didn't dance.
I've not had that experience, no.
And then they told us we were taking the patients to the zoo. And they had a lot of clothes that were donated that, you know, we could put the patients in because they didn't have big wardrobes and that. And I remember being at the zoo and one of our patients going to the bathroom and trying to choke a little girl. So we had to,
God.
you know, we really had to keep an eye on them. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're going on outings like that much anymore. We've learned a lot since then.
I think clinically, though, the blessing for me was being at Elgin in those years. This was like 61, 62. We made all our Christmas presents for our family because we were broke. So we did all these crafts with the patients. It was the fact that major tranquilizers were just coming in. So I saw people wrapped in cold sheets to decrease the mania. I saw people sitting in what looked like a washing machine, and they would try to sedate them with hydrotherapy. I saw insulin shock. I saw things that nobody saw, and it was just a changing of the times.
Well, they did electroshock therapy.
I did
then
too.
Yeah.
I did too. I worked in the ECT room at another hospital later on.
Oh.
Yeah, they did.
Although that was not a
my
terrible procedure, and it did help some people forget the things that were in their mind that were horrible situations and things like that, you know. But it was a lot different from the state hospital to then going into psychiatry in private hospitals, because the state hospitals really had a variety of some of the most dangerous people.
But I saw staffings and I saw discharge, so I was hopeful that people can get well.
You saw good things.
So I saw good things.
Yes.
I saw people that hadn't moved on the floor for 10 years. I saw that. They hosed them because they were catatonic and they weren't able to function. So I'm glad for those memories because we've come a long way.
You know, it was interesting. A neighbor that I used to babysit for, her parents had a lot of money and she had a psychiatric problem. And they sent her to a lot of private psychiatric hospitals, but they ran out of money. So then they sent her to Chicago State, and she was there when I got there as a student. And you talk about being catatonic, where they don't talk and they're, you know.
Frozen.
And she hadn't talked in a couple of years, and when I went in, she spoke to me.
Oh my goodness.
So sometimes when
The
people in
memories
psychiatry,
can bring,
you know,
bring that back.
Which brings up another piece, and that is confidentiality. And I think, you know, now we're in a media that's 24/7, and we talk, and there's talks about leaks. And I once had a next-door neighbor on my unit in a full-blown psychosis, and my husband was never told. I never would ever. And I think nurses take that, especially nurses, take that very seriously.
And we never used first and last names, anything. I mean, you'd never be even talking to another nurse in a booth in a restaurant or in the restroom or anything, or use anybody's names, because you never knew who was sitting next to you. You had to be careful. And I had different people too that were relatives of friends of mine, or
never said a
things
word.
like that. You never said a word, you know, about what was going on. And one time I had somebody from the mafia, a real mafia guy. And he used to come to our current events group and our discharge planning group. And every time we'd get to him to tell the story, I'd say, "You don't have to tell us your story."
We know your story.
I didn't want the other people or myself to be in jeopardy of hearing that story.
Put their life in danger.
He was later killed, as a matter of fact, by the mob. But, you know, it was interesting because, like you say, we saw people come in that were really upset about things, and then things would change and they could go out and face the world. Sometimes with the way the world is today, I said the sanest place I ever was in the psych unit. If those people knew that they were sick, and they'd say to me, what should I say when I go home? And my neighbors asked me where I've been. I said, tell them you've been checked out, have they? You know, you've been here and now you're sane.
Yeah,
so
there's more danger in the street than there is in the hospital.
Yeah,
for sure. I was reflecting back on my first job. I left Oak Park Hospital. I was offered a head nurse job, and I went to Gottlieb, and I was one of the first nurses hired. And it was so great because they were paying $4 an hour. Are you nurses listening? They were paying $4 an hour. So that was very, very interesting. And the other thing is, I think you learn so much from the people around you. So as a young nurse, I was transferred to the labor and delivery department, and I worked with and over a German midwife. And she used to call me Rutznaus, which means snotty little kid. And she'd say, Jackie, that baby's head is upside down. And she'd teach me. She taught me, and I was her boss. So that was really something. And her accent and the way she was just, she was a midwife in Germany, where my daughter now lives. But it is just so exciting that you can open your ears. And she's just an aide who washes the dirty pots and pans, but she was a wonderful lady, and she really helped me learn my obstetrics because she knew.
Well, we had a surgical instructor that used to tell the surgeons, you know, you need to get over here at this angle and do this and do that. And they'd say, no, I don't. And then they'd have to do what she said because the surgical instructor nurse knew more than some of them knew.
I always dreamed I'd be a surgical nurse. I'm going to be a surgical nurse. And I remember my evaluation. Jacqueline Bennett is not inclined to this service. Well, of course not. I love to talk. These people came in and they didn't talk, and they wheeled them out and they didn't talk. So I found my niche in psychiatry.
Yeah, definitely.
I loved working in surgery too, but you know, people don't realize that there's a lot of tension going on there, and you get really tired. There's a lot of standing, and
I was just clumsy.
Masks
and
on.
cold. I always thought it was so cold in surgery.
Oh yeah, it's cold.
Yeah, it was freezing.
Well,
yeah,
we had some interesting things, and if we were dating the med students that came in there to observe, you know, you're only sterile from here to here and in the front. So if you didn't like somebody, you just back into them and say, you're contaminated, you'll have to leave the room. I know. And people don't realize if you don't have, the circulating nurse doesn't count all of the sponges that are taken out of the person, and you're missing one, you can't close the patient surgically until you have them. And we had a situation like that in a cesarean section. Couldn't find it for quite a while until one of the medical students and interns went to the bathroom and found it, and there it had gone out on someone else's shoe.
Oh, gosh.
Did you have male nurses in your school of nursing?
We did have a few, but not in my class. Yes. We have 5 minutes left, so I want to give it to you. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, and there's many more, you know, technicalities now in surgical and in psychiatry, how things have completely changed, and, you know, the time in and time out. And again, surgery has not been an area that I worked in. Of course, I did rotations as well as psych. I don't have the experience like you ladies, but
we did 3 months
certainly
in
things
surgery.
have changed.
I don't know if you did you do 3 months
We did a
too?
month at least, I know.
And I remember distinctly there was an OB-GYN surgeon that had actually saved my mother's life when she had an ectopic pregnancy when I was much younger. And he was there, and I always shuddered when I would scrub with him because he could do a 3-hour surgery in 45 minutes. And the last day of surgery, when I finished my case, I thought, oh my God, thank God this is over, because it's been really, you know, a tense experience, and learning all those instruments and doing all this stuff. And they came to me and said, one of your classmates just got sick, and she was supposed to scrub with this doctor, and you're going to have to do it now. And it was him. But anyway, I got through it. But it was interesting because that man was unbelievable surgeon. His name was Dr. Zellinger, but his son is also a doctor now.
Surgery, and well, like you said, your passion was psych, and I believe, is that where you
No, it wasn't my passion.
I
ended up, my passion was emergency room.
Yeah, so back to surgical, or back to what I did, medical intensive care, things like that, you can't, there is no hands-on really. I mean, there's a lot of hands-on, but your patients are pretty much either on, you know, under anesthesia, or they're comatose. And I think we true nurses
We want to talk to them.
We want to talk.
We wanna talk.
We want to be with them. We want to interact with them.
Yeah.
I bet that those patients get a lot of conversation from the two of you.
Yeah. And that's not saying nurses who work in those areas. There is also certainly a lot of need and technicality there.
And you know, those patients need that. The hearing is your last thing to go. You know, and people think when they go to intensive care that they're expected to die, but in fact, they don't put you in there unless they expect you to live.
Oh, yeah.
So, and hearing is a very
Good point,
important
Karen.
thing to know what's going on and what's going on during the day and at night, because people, especially seniors, can get really crazy in the hospital
Yes.
when with all the noises and they don't know if it's day or night. We
And
used
their
to
med
get,
reactions.
yeah, they used to call me to the medical floors when I worked on psych because people were having psychiatric reactions to, you know, all of the noise and the darkness and all that kind of stuff.
It's a disturbing place to be.
You know, I worked in drug rehab one time, and it's interesting you say that. And there was a patient that nobody knew what was wrong with her. And of course, I knew what was wrong with her. They weren't trained in this psych stuff. She needed Cogentin. She was having a reaction to a psychiatric medication. So that was kind of fun to know that, like your experience where you knew you knew something the med students didn't know. But it
Makes you feel good.
It does make you feel good.
Hey,
Proud.
I do know what I'm doing.
And we did work hard for this.
Yeah,
we did
Well,
work
absolutely.
hard.
I actually had an instructor whose father was a doctor, her husband was a doctor, her brother was a doctor, and her whole thing was to show nurses were smarter than doctors. So when you went on the floor to do something, on the clinical floor, you had to find 3 mistakes that doctors made to pass
Lord.
for the day. But you know what? We did it. So anyway, nurses are very, very educated. For those who think that we're not, we have to know everything that we're going to do. And if some doctor orders something and it's the wrong thing or the wrong medicine or whatever,
have
and you
to
do
know
it,
that.
it's your fault.
Yeah.
So I hope this will entice some of you to go into nursing, because as we get older, we need good nurses to take
Absolutely.
care of us.
Exactly.
So do you have one last thing you want to say?
No, I thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I love what I do, and I'm happy to be with great nurses like yourselves.
Aren't you supposed to start something new?
I am going on a new venture and hopefully going to start a new little business with another partner of mine, and also along the lines of senior care. So yes, we're going to be called ELO Wellness.
How do you spell that?
ELO, just ELO.
So how can they find you?
Through you.
Okay.
How about we say that right now?
You can email asktvnurse@yahoo.com.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. And we're patient advocates for seniors. Flu shot season comes around. We can give flu shots. Traveling clinic. A lot of global corporations need Hep B, Hep A, things like that.
Nurses are teachers.
Absolutely, and a lot of health and wellness teaching as well. Seminars, you know.
Well, I didn't expect to be a journalist, but I have
You
written
are.
columns for the newspaper many times and co-authored this book, Nurses on Our Own. And Jackie, you were going to be the journalist, and I wrote the book. So we're waiting for your book.
It'll come. Don't worry.
I have
Just
a
a matter
second
of
one.
time.
I have a
And I can't
second
wait
one.
to read them.
That's what my father said. He said when they make it into a movie, which they did option, as a matter of fact, he said, I'll watch it then rather than read
Oh,
it.
he said that.
I didn't want him to be too shocked, though. There are some shocking things in here. Being a nurse does take you into all kinds of situations, I will
Absolutely
say
does.
that. But you can deliver babies, you can be with somebody when they're in hospice, you can do all kinds of interesting things. You can be on cruise ships, you can be in airplanes. I had many nurses at my business that were everywhere. I had 400 nurses everywhere. So
Can you work any time
sorry.
of the day?
We could talk forever, but we have to end. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.